But now comes the story of the captive queen. Here's a wonderful picture, because the story of Lion in Winter, isn't that great? Isn't that wonderful? Well, it's one of the great lines from the movie. The movie is filled with wonderful lines, but this is the Christmas celebration where she's allowed to come from the castle where she's has to stay. She's brought to one of the main castles in London, and all the boys and all the children, they all gather together, and they have a big family Christmas. And so in the movie, there's this wonderful line where she says, "What shall we hang, the holly or each other?" Meaning the whole family was at odds and was fighting, and it was true. They were. The boys were fighting with each other. Richard was fighting with John. John was jealous of all his older brothers and appealing to his mother, and the others were appealing to the father. And so the whole family was split and being maneuvered and encouraged by Philip, the King of France, the successor to Eleanor's husband. And so the King of France was interfering and trying to collude with the boys against Henry. And so by this moment in the great movie, the whole family is split apart. And here you see this great Merry Christmas from Grumpy, don't you? Wonderful. And there's Alison Weir's book. If you'd like a fun read, get The Captive Queen. It's fiction, but it's very good fiction, and it's very well researched. She knows exactly what she's talking about. So as they approached the 80s, which was going to be the last decade that they had together, they were rocked by a terrible event where the young Prince Henry, who was the Prince of Wales and the future King of England, and the one that Henry father adored and had spent all his time and trained and shown everything and had with him constantly and had turned over already many things to him. Young Henry died of an illness, a very sudden illness, very quick, came over, probably, could have been influenza, who knows what it was. But all of a sudden, Henry was gone. And from that family, it meant now, then the successor moved up. Everybody moved up. The next one was going to be Richard, the next oldest son. And so everything in the family was disrupted and thrown into chaos. And everyone began maneuvering and withdrew from England, and the boys moved to the continent and began to actually organize a rebellion against their father. And so in the 80s, by 85 and 6, Henry has a rebellion on the mainland, ripping his lands apart, and Eleanor is locked in the castle and out of the picture, and the boys are fighting with each other, with armies, with actual armies, and with the King of France constantly egging them on. So the 80s, 85, 86, 87 are very sad. Sad for her. She's hearing what's happening, but she can't do anything about it. And heartbreakingly sad for Henry. He has alienated everybody in the family. He's alienated from his wife, alienated from all his children. He's lost his best friend, lost his wife as a friend, and all his sons are his enemy. And so 87 and 88 are terrible years for him. He himself is feeling illness, slowing down. Riding a horse is becoming difficult. And all of a sudden then in 89, so this is a decade of trouble in the family. By 89, he withdraws to the castle at Chinon, which is above the Loire. We saw it on the map. So this is just a few miles from Angers and just a few miles up from Poitiers, and close to Fontevraud Abbey, which was the most important abbey in this part of France. And here at Chinon, he died with just servants around. No family, nobody there, no wife, no Beckett, no kids. So a very, very sad end. Here's a view from the castle looking up the river, and here is where he was laid to rest in Fontevraud, fairly nearby. And this is where Eleanor also will be at the end of her life. So the most important thing that happened immediately after the death of Henry was the immediate release of Eleanor. Word was sent back And the keepers at the castle, of course, all knew what it meant, all knew what had happened. Richard was now king of England, and his mother was, of course, to be released. And so now, in a spectacular show of love, the citizens of England pour forth into the street the road that she will take as she rides back to London out of the castle where she's been kept, and rides back to London to be joined together with her family. Thousands and thousands of Englishmen come out and line the road and cheer her on, and hooray, hooray, Eleanor. Of course, crying, everybody crying, because she thought people had forgotten her. She thought nobody even knew who she was, and instead, all those years in the castle had done absolutely nothing to cause people to forget her, and they loved her, and they knew what she had done, which was to hold things together and stay in touch with her family. And so now in London, her son King Richard is crowned King of England, 1189, and she is there to help assist him at this great moment. Almost immediately, Richard is asked by the then Pope to lead a crusade to the Holy Land. So this is a second crusade. This is actually the third crusade. His mother had been on the second crusade in the middle of the century. Now this is at the end of the century, 89, 90, 91. And he agrees to go, and you can see the travel. He goes to Spain, at one point stops, then he goes on to Sicily, where he sees his sister, who's the Queen of Sicily, and then finally joins Philip Augustus, who is the King of France, the son of Louis, so the son of the man who'd been married to Eleanor, and so joins up with Richard, and the two of them go to the Holy Land and attempt to take back the holy sites in Jerusalem. The main thing that people were moved by was Jerusalem, was to be able to go to Jerusalem and visit Jerusalem and have the freedom to visit the sites, because they'd been all closed to Christians. The Muslims had control of them. And so he and Philip now attempted to liberate the Holy Land, including meeting with Saladin, who was the leader of the Muslim forces, and made a deal. Got Christians access to the Holy Land, and then after this, he began to return to Europe. He'd been gone 2 years. It was time to come back, and on his journey, this is a picture, a contemporary picture. On his journey, his boat foundered off the island of Corfu. He had to put in. They got another boat, and then it happened again, and they had to put in again up at the top of the Adriatic. And so suddenly, the King of England, with just a few knights helping him, found himself on the coast at a shipwreck and with no protection. Now, the rule was that when you went on crusade, you were protected. You had a free pass. You had a safe conduct. Nobody was to touch you. But, of course, nobody paid any attention to that. And so very quickly, he and his small group of about 5 soldiers going with him were discovered. They did pretty well first. So they went up from the Adriatic and traveled, and they were pretty smart. Richard knew exactly what he was doing, so they took off any fancy clothing, and he warned everybody in his group, and they stayed at little hotels, little taverns and places, and paid for. But one stupid squire went down to the market to buy food for them and brought out a great big, huge, fancy gold coin that was very unusual and never seen in this little dumpy town up at the top of the Adriatic. So everybody in the market said, "Oh my goodness, did you see what that boy paid with? There must be fancy people here someplace. Where is he staying? Oh, well, he's staying over there at that little inn." So then right away they ran to some authority in that city, and they went to the inn, and they came in and they said, "Where are the foreigners? Where are the foreigners?" And Richard had heard this, so he ran into the kitchen, and he went and he started tending the pot. He put his head down over the pot, and he was stirring the pot. But, of course, he didn't get away with it because they took all the other 4 men, and then they asked everybody else, "Where's the other guy?" And they said, "Oh, he's stirring the pot." And so they were all arrested, and they were taken to the Duke of what would have been, the Duke of Austria, Duke of Vienna, and given over to him and put in a prison, a great big high on the mountain. And then later, this Duke, Leopold, turned him over to the Holy Roman Emperor, who would, of course, been the highest level figure in all of Germany and the Rhineland. So from that place to Germany, Richard was transferred. All the time, everyone knew he was missing. The Pope was asking, other kings, everybody was asking. Eleanor was asking, where is Richard? And he just disappeared. And he was in this castle, way up at like 2,000 feet high in southern Germany, under guard, and nobody knew where he was. And of course, all the authorities were lying and saying, oh no, we haven't seen Richard. Richard who? No, we haven't seen Richard. But one fascinating little thing happened. A troubadour poet was riding by on a trip through, and as he rode by the castle, he heard a man in the castle singing his poem. He was the author of the poem. He was the poet, and he was riding on his horse, and here was this man singing. So he answered it back, and of course the man in the castle went to the window and started singing, and the poet figured out this was Richard, because by, singing back and forth right away, they figured out. So he ran and told people. Suddenly it was clear that Richard was under the control of the Holy Roman Emperor, and so now all the pressure, all the international pressure came upon the Holy Roman Emperor. Here's a contemporary photograph taken from that spot where he's looking out, that guy who took the picture out there, he's looking out over all the forest that's all in front of it. So now the Holy Roman Emperor set a price on Richard's head, and it was a huge price. It was like the biggest ransom that anybody had ever heard of in all of European history. And of course he assumed it was too big, that nobody would be able to raise it. That was the whole point. He wanted to keep Richard in the prison because Richard was a pawn, and he had a number of people telling him, don't let him out. The main one was the King of France, who was constantly saying, whatever they're willing to give you, I'll give you more. So keep him there, because he wanted to get the territory that Richard had the right to. So at home in England, Eleanor went all over the nation and appealed to the Englishmen to contribute to the ransom. And the churches went and melted down their silver candlesticks, and the dukes and the duchesses went and melted down their silver. And slowly, all over the country, Eleanor began to build up and build up and build up chest after chest after chest of all these coins that she had to take to get her son released. Isn't it great? Isn't it a great image? Can't you just see this? It's religious, It's like there's this mother coming to rescue her son. And so she proceeded to raise money for month after month after month, and finally used all the international pressure. And so now the Holy Roman Emperor was forced to convene a convocation of Mainz. So in January of 1194, now he's been gone 5 years from England. And during his absence, Eleanor's been running the country. So in January of 1194, all of the Holy Roman Empire, and that meant all the dukes, so the Duke of Saxony, the Duke of Bavaria, all these leaders would come together at Mainz, and other kings would send representatives, so the King of France, of course, did. And Eleanor arrived with the ransom. And at the convocation, the electors of the Holy Roman Empire, so that would be 7 of the leaders, they were all to vote on whether the Holy Roman Emperor should turn Richard back over to his people. And of course the other men were in favor of it. It was just the emperor who didn't want to, and he had these backroom deals going on. So now they brought Richard to Mainz. And all these people gathered in this huge room, in this huge assembly hall, and he was allowed to address the convocation and appeal for release. And Richard was a great rhetor, a great speaker. And so he came before. Now here you already had Mother, sitting there with the ransom. and all these other people who thought she was great. This was, how old is she now? She's 70, 72, and famous, and the former Queen of France. And Richard stepped before the convocation and delivered this powerful address on why he should be released and how the ransom would be paid and how he had to go home to his country and this and this and this. And the whole convocation burst into tears. They were all moved to tears by his oration and said, release him. And of course, the emperor didn't want to, but he had absolutely no choice. Had to, so he finally, he gave in, and because the vote was clear, and Richard was finally handed back to his beloved mother, and she brought in the ransom and was paid. Here's the coins of gold. I love this picture. See the coins of gold there? She's bringing in the coins of gold to be given to the emperor, the greedy emperor, and now she and her beloved son travel back through Europe. Imagine the scene now. I mean, think of you're a resident somewhere of Germany or France, and you're watching this cavalcade of the Queen Eleanor and her beloved son, all of them coming home from, he'd been all the way to the Holy Land and going back, and then they go over the channel in their little boat. Don't you think that's cute? Don't you love my little picture? And come back to England through the Straits of Dover and come over to Sandwich. They arrived in the port of Sandwich. Look at that! Isn't that great? Can you imagine? Can you imagine the Englishman on the shore welcoming home this historic woman who had been leading their country for years and years and years, half a century at this point, and their beloved son who'd been to the Holy Land and now was coming back. All of which was quite a scene.